Hello, and welcome along to Free to Play. It's a podcast about video games coming to you from inside the Newshub newsroom. As ever, I am your host, Finn Hogan, and joining me from across the table, as ever, it's Mr. Zeno J, Mr. Jordan Tinney himself. How are you, Jordan?
I was really hoping you'd introduce me as like Dr. Fraser Crane, because that's very much what I feel like. This brown background,
I don't know how we're
very
eking
low
into Fraser
ambience of it all, you know.
Look, if this video game stuff doesn't work out, we'll pivot
We'll
into
just pivot
Frasier.
to therapy. Video games causes therapy, so we could just go to that.
And joining us for the first time, it's Mr. Duane Mutu. He's the director of Let's Play Live New Zealand. Thank you so much, Duane.
Oh, it's great to be here, gents.
Oh, what a bloody pleasure. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. Now, of course, with such esteemed company, we're going to be talking about esports. But before we get there, we just want to rattle off a little bit of the main food groups of video games, which is software, hardware, and industry bullshit. And let's start out with a little bit of hardware chat. Steam Deck has dropped. It's big. He made the announcement from New Zealand. I can't believe Gabe Newell hasn't come on the podcast yet. I've been hitting him up all this time. But could you just give me your top line reacts to Steam Deck dropping, Jordan? It's some people have been saying, look, Nintendo weren't going to do a Switch Pro, so Valve stepped in and done it for them. What do you think of that take?
Oh, no. They're completely different categories, you know. Nintendo's been in the game for so long that they own the handheld market. And it's always fun to see competitors try to come in and take that. I guess, you know, in the long run, maybe the only one that's actually had a sort of stab at it was the PSP, but because Sony weren't investing enough behind it, it could never take any of that market share, and Nintendo were never worried about losing any market share to it. So Steam Deck, I don't know what Steam Deck will do. Personally, the favorite things that I've seen about it have been people saying that it'll be really good for visual novel games.
Doki Doki Literature Club, yeah, boy!
Yeah, exactly. So it'll be more portable, which I think is great. But it depends. Like, I have to wait to play it to see how the PC gaming experience in a portable fashion is.
I just don't know who it's for, right?
Yeah.
Like PC Master Race, they want everything 16K.
They want their RGBs,
They want
man.
RGBs. They want their they want to sit on their throne of graphics cards and lord over the rest of us console plebs. And I'm just not sure what the Steam Deck is shooting for, because Nintendo have got the software to back up that portable. Like, we go to the Switch because we get to play Breath of the Wild, right? Like, without that kind of software exclusivity, I'm just not quite sure what niche they're trying to nail down.
And that's the thing is, like, with the Steam library, like, they have a lot of games, but the argument to that is Nintendo has a lot of good games.
Yes.
So just because you have a library of games doesn't mean it's necessarily something the market requires. And I can't help but think of Steam Tams every time somebody says Steam Deck. So, you know,
hey, it's got meme potential. It's got meme potential.
Everybody's already been doing it. They're like, is that the Nintendo Switch in your kitchen? No, this is the Steam Deck.
Did it light a fire for you, Duane, or were you just kind of like, on Steam Deck?
No, I tell you what, this is because that was what I was trying to work out. I think it's pretty good. I'll tell you why I think it's pretty good. So back in the heyday, you know, I was around when we launched the PSV, the GameCube, and we're seeing the separation of games, right? And what's interesting to me is, you know, when you look at the young generation, they have mobile and the like, but the reality is a lot of them are playing PC.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when they're playing PC, what's interesting, my son right now will be playing some PC games upstairs. He is the perfect person for that because they can port into it, so they're kind of used to it. So it's almost like, to me, it's more like a mobile mobile PC. And that's how I look at it. So I think it's kind of interesting. I don't think the hardcore PC cats are into that. I don't think the back of all of us who are kind of PSV dudes and
old fuckers.
Just old dudes. And so I just actually think there's a market for it. So I actually thought it was quite clever. I mean, I'm like you, Jay. I want to see it, have a play, but in concept, I just thought this is just getting the kids who play PC, which are outnumbering a heap of people, and they don't have mobiles or just don't have the capability on there. I think this is quite good.
Price point wise, though, we are looking fairly steep. Like, if I think it's for 512 gig for that top tier hard drive space, then the SSD, you're coming in around $1,000 as well for the portable, which I think is going to price a lot of people out. But of course, that's the story with a new console release, right?
I almost wonder if Nintendo heard about it, and that's why they actually held off on the Switch Pro, because they wanted to see what it's like and then build the device to compete against it. Because the thing is, I don't think it'll take a lot of Switch market share.
Yeah, right.
But I think it could potentially dent it enough, like Duane said, it might capture a little bit of market that would, sway toward the Steam Deck. So, I would not be surprised if Nintendo knew and they're like, okay, let's hold off on the Switch Pro and see what this unit does.
Yeah.
And then build our next machine to that.
Yeah, fair enough. So I think basically it's a wait and see story. But overall, I'm excited. Gabe, you're welcome on the podcast anytime. Software wise, just wanted to give a quick shout out to the news that broke yesterday. Our boy Umurangi Generation took out.
Umurangi Generation.
I mean, it taking out that top prize. That prize was won by Minecraft when that came out, right? So like it
knows good games.
It knows good games, and I just think it's incredible. It's great for the industry. I can't wait to see what they do next. I listened to him on RNZ yesterday, and it's something that really was of interest to me. He was talking about how the representation of te reo in video game format was so important to him, but he was frustrated because while there is some representation, every time he'd ever seen a Māori character in a video game, they were a warrior. Yeah. And he was like, we do other stuff, eh? You don't have to have us doing a haka every single time you put us in a video game. And I thought that was interesting. I think that speaks to how great video games are as a medium for storytelling, because it's a post-apocalyptic, photography simulator, and it's a way of getting across culture in a way that's just not tokenistic at all.
Yeah.
And I just thought I couldn't be happier to hear that. I'd be very, very, very pleased to get them on the podcast in a couple of weeks. But any thoughts to chip in, Jordan?
One of my favorite things I've read about it was that it basically won the Cairns of games.
Yeah.
Like, to win the Cairns of games is a pretty big deal. And you're right, it's dealing with multi-futurism in a way that isn't tokenistic towards our people. It's actually, saying there's more to us than just what you keep perceiving or what your history wants you to perceive. So it's really fantastic that this jury was like, this is a good game, and it really makes me want my gaming PC more, so I can actually
it's come to Switch now as well. So
I don't have time for a Switch.
I will bring you a Switch. I will bring you a Switch.
Bring me a gaming PC.
Want to throw some love to Umurangi Generation, Duane?
Look, I think the whole te reo movement is just good, right? Like, I think that what we're seeing, and I can speak to it. I mean, like Jordan, you know, when we grew up, it was sort of, this quite polarizing thing being Māori in this country, and this kind of movement to the youth where everyone just embraces everyone, and te reo is our, I guess our native language. We should be able to speak. I always say this in general about te reo, but I'll get to my point about the gaming pieces. When you go to Fiji, part of the magic of Fiji, apart from being warm and having the palm trees, they're speaking Fijian, or like you're in Tonga and they're speaking Tongan. And so I'm always kind of curious that we're an island nation, and we also know why that is. But I love the fact that more of the youth than any nationality, I'm talking Pākehā, anyone should be able to speak some te reo because we're living here. Yeah. And so I think stuff like this, I'm a big fan of anything where I think it's, like you said, it feels real, it's authentic, it's not forced on you, and then that the youth get that, right? Like they're just going to play, and then even if they're just saying killed or they're picking up a word, that's good, to me. So that's just my holistic piece. And so I just think, fair play. That's next level for getting it, obviously, but then just at a higher level, I think it's super cool. Yeah.
Just being unique.
Yes.
Why be like everyone else?
Yes.
If you've got something that makes you stand out, do it. So
So, I mean, from one side of industry to the other, that's glowing praise across the board. Now we have to swing hard into absolute industry bullshit, because we can't do this podcast without touching off on the legal action being brought against Blizzard in California now. News broke this week. And so widespread, just to be clear, that Blizzard is denying many of these allegations, but many allegations from former staff about really horrendous treatment of female employees, just really toxic sort of bro culture, and which has led to some pretty dire consequences. That one staff member did take their life, and so it just speaks to a broader problem, of course, that we're seeing of stories over the last 5-10 years, right? Of there are deep systemic issues across the board in many developers, and particularly in terms of representation in game developers, and so it's frustrating some of the response that's come out about it from J. Allen Brack, who I've interviewed. He's been on the podcast before, and he was a great guy. He spoke eloquently about the game, but his response to this in particular was pretty bad. And as I was showing Jordan before we started recording, Jason Schreier, incredible video game journalist, did leak an internal email from Blizzard with Brack responding to some of these allegations. And when Brack did a line saying, I just want to bring up a household name in my household, Gloria Steinem, and just saying, I've been a feminist since ages ago. And it was essentially the equivalent of saying, yeah, but some of my best friends are black. So, like it was...
So gaslighty.
It was so gaslighty. It was so pretentious. It was self-relating. So, it's... Look, unfortunately, it's not an unfamiliar story. We've been here before. We've been here with Blizzard before. But the only good thing, I guess, that we can say is that there's increasing amounts of attention, there's increasing amounts of pressure, and hopefully we'll start seeing some sort of meaningful changes around this. But I mean, I'm not holding my breath that it's going to change immediately, but at least it's starting. Do you have anything to chip in, Jordan?
No, just sad.
Yes,
that's what it is, and you know. You point out it's like how can we change it, and it is ideals where a lot of men take it on board as to dismantle us. When we say dismantle the patriarchy, we're not saying we're changing how the system works in terms of equality, that it's going to completely shift towards women, though that wouldn't be the worst idea. It's trying to rebalance everything so, these things don't happen where a person feels like they can't go to work or they can't do the work because of what's happening within the workplace. And I think the worst parts of it is just that failure to hold people equal within the workplace. Yeah. Like a lot of the allegations were around that these women were working so much and just getting nothing, and it's like it just sucks. And
it's the thing of as well, and I've read a lot of the feedback that's been coming has been saying like the problem is that while everyone takes strong stances against this kind of behavior, no actual punishment gets meted out, and nothing actually happens. It's the equivalent of thoughts and prayers. So I mean, this is a story that you must have seen as well, Duane, and again, you must have seen this happen more than once across the industry, like we have.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, really. I mean, like you said, is it like I just don't like. It's so antiquated, the thinking, right? Like again, it goes back to that point we're talking a bit about racial to a point before, or that racism piece into this feminist piece. It's like people are just equal, man. Like that's the bit, right? But so I think it needs to change. But what I will say is and that's holistically is what I think is, and make sure no one's really listening that knows me deeply. But the thing is when you work in publisher, I'll tell you this, right? Is everyone's perception of gaming from a community point of view. You go to E3, Armageddon, PAX, domestic level, when you see it for what gaming is, right? Yeah. That's a culture of gaming. Where I come from, from the other side, when you start in, I'm not saying I'm not around that, is it's very much a suits and tie industry. Yeah. Right, like, and that's what people don't see. Like when you think about Blizzard or you think about the biggest brands in the world, they are suit and tie people. Like the majority of them could, if you didn't know it was a video game, you didn't see anything, they would look like massive corporations. And I think that old toxicity comes from that kind of culture, right? Like it's just this kind of thing where it's like hierarchy, particularly in the US, where there's this like, I'm the CEO and you don't talk to the CEO unless you're like one below them and so on and so forth. And it's just, and then what happens is it just festers this breeding of kind of chauvinistic kind of output, and they can't get a handle on it, right? Like that's what it is. But I just say that's really what publishing, that sort of side has been like, right? Like I'm not saying I think it's what's happened is that the lid's being opened, and I think there's more to come. I'm not saying the Blizzard, but I'm saying I think you'll start to see some of these things popping off more because it's been around forever, right? Like
yes, and I think that's the case. I mean, we look at Riot Games, we've seen it from Ubisoft, we've seen it from all the big publishers, and I'm sure that trickles down.
That's right, Michelle Ancel.
Yes. Yeah. So unfortunately, I think you're exactly right, Duane. And I wish we could say different, but sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say. So I guess that's the only thing we can hope for. Before we pop into the reason that we're all here to chat esports, just one quick shout out I want to say to anyone that needs something new to play. I just picked up Death's Door on Xbox, which is like if anyone's seeking that Zelda Metroidvania style, top down, perfectly polished action,
top down
isometric sort of classic sort of Zelda style, but an incredible art style, really really snappy action. It's maybe about 7, 8, 9 hours long, so it's not too long, 25 $25. If you need a perfectly polished experience for that length of time, pick it up. Soundtrack's incredible, and in terms of story and plotting, it's got that really lovely thing, which I love in narrative, where you've got incredible cosmic power, but coupled with like really boring bureaucracy, kind of like Loki in the TVA, or like Control, where you've got all these amazing mystic powers, but you just work in an office. So you play as a Reaper, like a Grim Reaper. You play who's collecting souls, but it's just like a terrible office job, and so you get sent out into these mystical worlds. But everyone's just like, yo, have you collected those souls yet? And you're like, oh God, okay, man. Like, God, I'm just so on the grind. And it's very much kind of like Grim Fandango from Tim Schafer and that sort of speak, but it's much more action heavy. So if you just want to really, it's something that walks the line beautifully between being really charming and kind of creepy. It walks that line beautifully. But yeah, just a lovely, polished Metroidvania, Zelda-esque experience. Someone please pick it up if you need something to play this weekend.
It sounds similar to the Reapers in The World Ends With You.
Yeah. Kind of like,
That's just their job.
That's just exactly. And I love
that concept. Yeah, that's really cool.
But yes, because we have Mr. Duane Mutu on the podcast with us, we are, of course, talking esports. And I really wanted to talk about it this weekend because the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games happened in the last 48 hours.
Finn completely planned this. He knew the Olympic Games.
I knew. Guys, don't go on about it. I'm a pretty good journalist. I know when the Olympics are. But what really struck me was watching the opening ceremony, the amount of video game music that was playing at the Olympics. So they came out to Dragon Quest theme. The Final Fantasy Victory theme was in there. And of course, it's in Japan. It's playing into some stereotypes. But I did find it a little bit galling because esports are not at the Olympics, but, well, they are in this weird sort of terrible technical sense where there is the Olympics virtual series. So they've dipped their toe, like their pinky toe into the waters, and they've taken some sporting events that are at the Olympics and just done digital versions of them, and which is what no one asked for, but at least it's a step in the right direction. And Duane, I remember doing a story with you 3 years ago on Newshub Nation, and I remember something you said to me where you were like, it's not a matter of if, it's when we become an Olympic sport. And so could you just talk a little bit about, with the Olympics happening now, where you see the current state of esports sort of globally at the big holistic level, and then kind of give us a little picture of where we are in New Zealand right now?
Yep. So you're talking esports, how big it is right now?
Yeah, how big it is, and when we're talking about, since I talked to you 3 years ago on the path to the Olympics, how far along that path are we?
Yeah, look, I mean, fundamentally, I still stand by that. It is going to be a win, as you just saw, as you alluded to. And some people listen and go, it's crazy. Now, this isn't a personal opinion piece. This is a reality piece. Let's just be honest about that, right? Everyone's going to be on either side. Video game fans are going to say, why? The Olympics hardcore will say, no way, but the reality is it's going to happen, right? Let's just be honest. That's the first thing. And so the journey really for that has been that the Olympics is a commercial venture. Let's just be clear about that too. Now, it started off differently, of course, but the reality is it's built itself into a commercial venture. The cities in which they in the last couple of Olympic cycles are just left as wastelands, right? Like the money you need to pour in to do that is doomed. And so it's just crippled. And that's what the reality of it is. And so you look at things like surfing, you look at the fact that skating's there, that is only a youth grab. And so if we think about the biggest youth movement in the world as let's just say even as a pastime or a thing to do, and then you call it a sport, which I do, it is esports, right? Competitive video gaming. So this is what's happening. Like we've already seen the moves through. Specific to esports, what happened was that we saw it start in the Asian Games. And so what they did is they did it as a demonstrative sport. And it was, interestingly, a mobile title. It was League of Legends, which we saw China take on Korea, I think was the final. Over 1 million people tuned in to watch that, right? Like that summarized everything, like it was like, let's taste this. And then they went to, Sochi, which was their Winter Olympics, and they had it, because obviously it was Korea. They had this kind of off to the side, which people didn't see. They actually had esports up there. Nothing, openly there, so to speak. They had a lot of the officials up there checking it out. And then we've fast forwarded to what you're talking about, right? Which is then they've announced a virtual series. But on the side, and we'll come back to the virtual series, on the side, next year they've announced that at the Asian Games, it is medalled. Now, these are all aligned, right? Like, so you follow the pathway. It is actually medalled at the Asian Games, which is underneath the banner of the Olympics, right? Technically speaking. So this is how they're testing these things. And so, like I said, it's not if, it's when. Now, the Virtual Olympic Series, and this gets to the real question is when and what steps you need to get to be when.
Yeah.
And these are the pieces. The pieces are that you've got publishers, unlike sport. So that's number one. And so the publishers don't really care, and they're going to want a lot of money because, it's not like swimming where you just put in the pool. It's like you're going to kind of get League of Legends, or you got to get Valve or someone on board. Yeah. That's number one. Problem number two is they have these Olympic values, so they speak of. So they can't have the biggest titles, which are primarily shooters, and they don't want anything around those. That's sort of the internal politics. So now they're picking games that go, okay, we've got to find ones that we want to do. Publisher aside, what would they look like? And then they don't have a national body, like international body, that they really are looking at. It's either ISF or it's GEF, right? And both of them are sort of fighting for that piece. So they don't have a natural IOC, like the cycling or the rowing. So they've got a few political hurdles to go through, but the desire is absolutely there. You can see it. So what they've come out with, which personally I think was horrible, it's the Virtual Olympics Series. And so for those who don't know what that was, it was aligned to the Olympics to lead up to Tokyo now, as you alluded to, over the last couple of months. It was a hasty announcement. I spoke to the New Zealand Olympic Committee here. They had no idea about it. The day after it broke, I spoke to them. They didn't even know what it was about. Wow. That shows how, right? And that's how the removing of it was. And so they were like, no idea. And so the game, what they did was, to your point, Finn, they basically came out with cycling, rowing, cycling and rowing. And they basically did the games where it was like Swift, where you ride and it's like a digital version. So you're actually riding your bike physically and moving yourself through. We saw a lot of that over COVID, right? Like they do all the same. So that was a couple of the games, which mean nothing to gamers, right? Like that's not really a thing. I think it's more like gamification of sport.
Yes.
And then we saw baseball, which is because of the alignment, I think, obviously to Japan. And it was Konami's, I think, which was like, and it was only for Japan and some Asian countries, so it wasn't even global.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not even the good baseball game. Which is better, but it's not like the. And so that was not really a big thing. And then the interesting one, which I think has some legs in it, is Gran Turismo. Aligned to FIA. And so that was the one that we helped with in New Zealand. And we actually tried to help qualify. Interestingly, there's 16 spots available. New Zealand had one of those slots. Oh, sorry, Australia and New Zealand had one of those slots. There was only 3 for all of America. And that's Central and Southern. So we actually had statistically an easier shot as an Australian or New Zealand to make that final 16. So that's the Virtual Olympic Series. And the idea was that you qualify and that it's not medaled, but you go up. And that's sort of, I think, if you just take away whether it was good or bad, you sort of saw, I think, the lens of the future way in for the Olympics in gaming, which is maybe motor racing, which is kind of aligned to FIA, and maybe a sports sim in time. That's what I see happening first.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, there's lots to unpack there, isn't there? But the difficulty as well would be, what do you see maybe 10, 20 years down the line? Would it be like esports would exist like track? It'd be a series of different events based on like, okay, well, here's our FPS medaled event, like here's our MOBA medaled event, and then you'd have to have whatever specific title was in there. But yeah, it is, as you say, you've got to be like, okay, well, which version of the MOBA is it going to be, and is there going to be some jockeying among publishers to be that person?
I'm so excited by that concept. That would be so cool. Imagine having those genres like that.
Yeah, like what would be your, in your head, maybe give me your optimistic vision, and then maybe your like pragmatic vision for where you think we'll be in 10 to 20 years.
Right, optimistically, and I know there'll be some purists that don't want to see this, right? But at the height of an Olympic Games, when it's good, i.e. there's no COVID and people are in there in the cities, and I've been about it, like it's amazing, right? Like the venues, it's absolutely crazy, amazing. And I think of like TI, and I think of the League of Legends Worlds, and I think about that merging of like the youth coming through, and the youth aren't even really the youth, right? Like most people up to 40 playing video games, so they're like real people with money. And so I'm going, like, at an optimal level, you would have the biggest games, MOBAs there. So you would have the Dota arena, you would have the LoL arena, you would have the FPS arena, and they would just be setting up like the velodrome or the swimming or whatever. And you could just go there, like, check out basketball, and you roll next door, and then it's like fully kitted out like TI. And I'm like, that's super rad. And I think, to wrap around that, what would be part of it would be AI, VR, and AR type stuff all merging into one. So you're kind of aligned. So the Olympics feels like it's more of a digital playground, but you're going to check it all out. And then you can still have some of the purest stuff there. But the purest stuff would engage me because I watch swimming, but I don't really want to because I watch it once every 4 years because it's on telly now, right? Yeah. And I go, but if I'm there watching LOL or I'm there watching something else, I'll be aligned because of my mobile and the internet that surrounds it. That's the goal, right? Like, and that makes that thing super rad. Like if you can make the Olympics like almost putting the best of esports and the best of what the sporting and mass participation kind of world is on, that's 20 years from now, right? Yes. That's a long way. Yeah. But I think primarily what you'll see, and this is a sad state, is I'm actually way more pessimistic towards what it's going to end up looking like.
Right.
So I think it's going to happen, right? Like that's my point. I think it's going to happen. So what form does it take? And that's why I'm really so concerned, because what you're going to have is if you go the route that they've gone now, which is Zwift, cycling digitally. Yeah. We've got cycling. We're at the Olympics. I don't need you.
We don't need you in a virtual world.
I want to see them cycling. And so if I want to see the best video gamers, and as we know as gaming people, you know who the best are, right? Like you know what that looks like. So this hybrid model is terrible. Like that's what I'm saying. And when you go that way, all you've actually done is polarized and start this conversation, which is what purists will say is like, see, I told you the Olympics are mugs, that's yuck, no one cares. And of course, no one will care from a gaming perspective because it's not good. Yeah. So they've got to go all in. And like I said, unfortunately, I'm pessimistic to the point that I can't see them fully embracing it the right way and going, you know what, let's get the big boys and let's just do a deal with the big publisher and go hard.
Well, I mean, it speaks to a broader issue, right, of engagement from institutions with the gaming world. Like, the gaming has progressed so much faster than a lot of the gatekeeping institutions, whether it's in media or in sports, have been able to keep up. So the people that make those sort of decisions don't know what they're talking about. And you don't want to make it this sort of snarky us versus them thing. But I see it all the time working in a newsroom of sometimes, having to push to get a story along about a video game and then having the eyebrow raise of like, oh, well, and you want to throttle them and be like, this is the biggest entertainment industry on the planet. Like, it shouldn't be fighting for legitimacy alongside.
They've already created all of those, like that story.
So it is frustrating, isn't it? And I hope that eventually commercial imperatives will force it through, even if the people who are gatekeepers in this area are reluctant. I like to think that someone's going to look at the writing on the wall and go, every day a baseball fan dies and 3 esports fans are born. And so and I mean that sort of facetiously, but I think it's true. And I think when you look at the, as you say, median age of an esports fan, I think it's 21 to 35, I think, in the US. Median fan for most traditional ball sports, I think it's like 35 to 54. Like, so there's already like this big age bracket difference. And I also just think commercial sports are going to become more, it's going to flow the other way as well, right? I think more traditional sports are going to become a bit more esportsified, and I think you're going to see a lot of them like utilizing Twitch as they already do. But I feel like I watch Bryce Blum. He's an esports lawyer. He deals with a lot of the contracts for esports players in the US. He's amazing. And he was talking about how he was like, imagine how great it would be if you were a massive basketball fan and you could watch LeBron when he's practicing and he's got a GoPro strapped to his chest and he's just talking you through the way he makes every shot and the way he makes every little bit of training. And he's like, that's what an esports fan has with their favorite streamer and their favorite player, is at any point, all points of the day, they can hop in and have this like intimate connection with that person, walking them through and responding to them in real time in the chat. And he's like, that's a kind of access that you could only dream of in traditional sports. So I think the point being is like there's more avenues for engagement in esports that just don't exist for traditional sports, that it's going to integrate so perfectly with the internet, with the medium. So I think just from a pragmatic perspective, if you're one of these gatekeepers and institutions that allow this, you'd have to see that and be like, well, that's where the money's going to be.
Well, when you were talking about the writing on the wall, like I was thinking you need the money to be on the wall because that's how the corporates are going to adjust to it. They need to see that revenue from it.
Well, I mean, you could probably talk to this a bit more, Don. Like, tell me a little bit about, for particularly if someone's watching and isn't mad into esports and isn't as familiar, like the money is there already. Like the International is one of the most moneyed events in the world, right? It's so like the money is flowing, but is it flowing in the right places to get esports through the door, I guess would be the question.
I think it is. I mean, that's what, so if we think about just at the big boys in the world, you look at Google, you look at Amazon, you look at Microsoft, Sony to an extent, like all the mass media players in the world, they're in. Right, and they've failed, and they keep coming back. You look at Microsoft. To be honest, look at Microsoft. They went and they created Mixer, and then had to sell it to Facebook. Sorry, Facebook's the other one. So all the big power players in the world are in, and that's why. So the money's flowing, microtransactions, people consuming, viewership's up, players up, and it's not slowing down. So the money is absolutely there. Then you go to the level below. Think about all your brands. Every brand is there now, right? Like from Louis Vuitton, which sounds bizarre for some people listening that don't know. Like Louis Vuitton and BMW, things you would never have attributed to
Ferrari and Fortnite.
Years ago. Ferrari, right? So that happens. Then I've always been a big fan, to your point, Finn. I've said the same thing. One of the big things around sport, and this is what gaming should embrace, or say esports, is these are 100-year-old sports. They have massive fundamentals that are really strong commercially. You think about the NFL, NBA, around the world, the way they commercialize, sell merchandise, the way they're able to tell stories about LeBron, Lakers versus Boston. These things are everywhere. So gaming can learn a lot that way, and the money's all through there, and they can learn to commercialize. So I think money is absolutely both ways, and money certainly as an esports and only getting bigger. To your point about TI, 40 million or whatever it was, I think this year, and most of that crowdfunded, right, which shows there's also people willing to give up hard-earned money. And I guarantee you, that if you wanted to put up for synchronized swimming, which is on the Olympics shortly, right? Like, no disrespect to that, you're not 40 million for those people. Like that, and so it shows. So I think that's not it. It goes back to a lack of understanding. Like solely, it comes down to it's generational. I've always said this as well as it needs people like you, Finn, it needs people like Zeno J, hopefully people like myself who are getting older within institutes that hold material jobs. And I've seen that already over 5 years in New Zealand, in Australia and the like, is where you've had these people who are sort of not senior management. So the people just roll their eye at you like, what? Like, we're not spending it here. And then all of a sudden that person's gone. And then all of a sudden, Finn, you're the CEO of, say, like Pepsi. And you're like, we're absolutely doing that deal. And so I think that's what we need is like, it's more that, but it's just taking longer because you've got so many antiquated voices there. And it's still to this day, every time I'm on the media, and I live in video games as far as a living, I'm literally at the 50-50 split. There's still people ridiculously that like just have no idea, and they say like terrible things and they have no idea that it's a real thing.
On that, what conversation are you the most sick of having? Because you, as you say, you're one of the most visible people in the media on this. Like, what do you hear coming out of a journalist's mouth or a pundit's mouth that just grinds your gears?
Well, I think there's two. The first one is esports is not a sport,
right?
Like that's the big one, right? Like everyone's like, that's not a sport. It's not a sport. And I'll tell you, I stood up in front of Sport New Zealand conference about 3 years ago. And in that room was, the All Blacks and NZR, and there was cricket, and there's literally everyone, right? And, when I went up and started talking about this, you should have seen, like, I was looking out there. So only I know that I was, like, looking in this room, looking at them. I felt like, talking about pitchforks and wanting to rip me off stage. It was that kind of whole concept. And that's what I hear a lot into the media, too, is, like, it's not a sport. And this whole perception, and I always said, if it wasn't called esports, let's just say it was just called virtual gaming or some other name, we wouldn't have this conversation. It's just for some reason there's this thing that it's a sport, esports, and sport. Totally. And I think that if the E went away and it was like virtual gaming, no one would. I just hate that. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's as we all know, it's absolutely a pastime. It's competitive. Money, it translates everywhere. We don't even have to go there. But
so do you just want to angle your camera down? I think you're slowly slipping out of frame.
You're going down your Mario pipe.
Sliding down there he is. Anyway, as you were saying.
So that's that's one, and I think we're well past that, and that's a good thing. The other one is about more from the parent and the fear factor, right? The one that's about kids should all they do is video game. They should be outside doing something, that's and that's a full stereotype. I mean, I can speak to a couple of kids. I coach sports teams traditionally, work with people who have kids and dads who play, and interestingly, deal with all sorts of corporate CEOs who would never expect to play games with their kids. So again, those are the two that are really frustrating because they're just they're not real. And what I think people miss around the kid piece is that I look at sport like content. So what the problem with sport is the sport of content. It backs your Olympic point, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to, like, for example, my son will go ride his bike. For example, maybe people listening, like my son plays basketball and my daughter gymnastics. Every kid's playing sports. They go to all they're doing. But what happens is when they come home, back in our day, we'd go and watch one TV and you put your dad with arm around you and go, we're watching the All Blacks, son. Then they'll crack a beer and watch it like tonight. But whereas now, kids aren't going to want to watch. They don't want to watch that. They're on Twitch. They're on, social media platforms, and that's the big bit. It's interactive content. So the content of sport, i.e., watching sport, is not a thing. That's why it's declining, and they're watching it in gaming, and it's interactive as well. And that's the two bits. And so those are the two bits. I'm always a little bit frustrated. Is esports a sport? Yes. My kids should be outside. They're inside playing too many games. It's stupid.
Yes, and again, it broadly just comes back to a lack of understanding, as you pointed out, right? Like they don't, but they see their kid playing a game and they think, well, they're isolated doing that. And I'm like, and a lot of the time they're not going to be isolated doing that. That's if they can have an incredibly vibrant social experience while doing that.
And they're creating something.
They're creating something. Like my niece and nephew are madly into Minecraft, as so many young kids are. And my sister was really worried initially, but then when you actually break it down and you just open the door to their understanding a little bit, but look how much better this is. Look what your kid made. Look at the world that they made here, instead of being plonked down passively, just soaking in a cartoon, which was just constructed to just latch their attention on as much as possible.
Well, it's an interesting point, because it's like it can come around to consumerism, because Minecraft is just modern Lego.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is.
Exactly.
So not only is Minecraft allowing these kids to be fully creative, because you're so free within that world, but you're reducing consumption because there's less Lego in the world.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And that's always the broader point that I try and make about why we should put more investment into the video game space in New Zealand, because it's like, if we want to put our money where our mouth is in terms of actually bringing down our carbon economy, leaning away from agriculture as our primary industry, there's a limit to how many cows you can fit on every hectare, but there's no limit to your export of games. Like Finland did it. Finland's worth $4 billion because they made Angry Birds. They invested over a couple of decades tens of millions of euros, which is a drop in the bucket in the long term. But if we'd done the same thing, there's no reason we couldn't have a $4 billion game economy here. And the tyranny of distance, all the things that are barriers to traditional physical industries in New Zealand don't exist for gaming. And so, it's a limitless, frictionless export.
Maybe that's what Icarus will be.
Yeah, I mean, well, exactly. And that's great. We've got such amazing talent in New Zealand, but a lot of those studios are old, as Stephen Knightley from the NZGDA will often bring up. Like those studios are older and they're established, and we don't have as many growing up to replace them because we're not supporting it. Australia's just brought in 40% tax rebate for new gaming startups to come in from next year. And it's crazy. It's crazy money, and it shows that they're taking it seriously. And so I if we could get even a fraction of that here, I spoke to Chelsea Rapp, current chairwoman of the NZDA, and It's frustrating. But I mean, don't worry, I'm coming back around to this. We've got another story on Newshub Nation. Tune in for a couple of weeks. We're going to get the minister on, and we're going to put this to them. My worlds are colliding. My video game world and my politics world. I'll shut up.
Get your politicking out of here.
But Duane, I mean, obviously we've spoken about this before, but everything that we're talking about with esports is also a broader story about how great gaming economy overall could be for New Zealand specifically.
Oh, absolutely. We've spoken about it, and to your point, Finn, it was shocking. The 40%, and it does play a part. I know politicking, but it's so important. What you got to realize is that I'm actually on a board over there in Australia. We're on the studios from Australia. We have no one from New Zealand. They get 40%. So the reality is they've just doubled their economy. They're going to poach all our talent from New Zealand. And we were before them. Like New Zealand was before them. Like we were the next in the queue. We should have supported it, and then we should have been bringing all the talent over here, and we haven't. So we're just now backwards and going to suck all the talent. And we've spoken about this, and it leads into this kind of esport pieces. What do you need to be good? Like, what would you need to make us good? And you think about studios, you think about what you need in esports and kind of the whole video game ecosystem. One, you need good internet. So Korea is, obviously we've seen that, and New Zealand, has good internet. Like around the world, we have a really good internet infrastructure system, and it's getting better with 5G. So we can tick that box. Are we liked as far as, would you want to live here? Is it safe? Is it a good condition? Sure, it might be a bit pricey, but it's very good to live. So a lot of people want to live here, particularly in COVID, that's accelerating, right? So we tick the two major things that you'd want. And the third one that you need is ultimately government support. Yeah. You need the government to go and, without getting too deep into it, what does that really mean? Well, you just need the government. I'll give you the film example, which everyone should be aware of, is that to attract the studios, which we saw under John Key, we put out basically, a form of legislation or legislations to go, we're going to give you money to come across. That's, the simple way to look at it. Video games have never had that. Yeah. Like not even $1. Like that, like that's ridiculous. So you think to yourself, okay, so if movies, and we'll quote a stat, it's like I think it was 57 billion revenue for video games out of the US last year, and that was bigger than both Hollywood and music combined. I think it was 32 for theatrical billion and about 12. So we're already way bigger. So just to put it into context, why on earth are you attracting? Sure, I get it as a country. You want to attract, what the blueprint is. Let's roll that over.
Yes.
And just say simply, we're going to just do the same as what we've done with film. We're going to attract studios, we'll give you rebates, we'll help make visas easy. And then what we'll see is it'll just grow everyone from players, talent, more work for everyone, money. And then, of course, we start developing our own stuff and we push it out internationally. That's exactly what we should be doing.
Yeah.
Jacinda, I know you're listening.
She does. Religiously, she tunes in.
Jacinda, call us.
Yeah. Please. Duane, I'm mindful of your time, so I won't keep you too much longer, but you've just spoken very passionately and eloquently about the big picture stuff, what we could be doing to support the industry. But just to bring it down to the esports level, could you just give me like a little snapshot of where you see esports in New Zealand currently with all your work in Let's Play Live, but also where you could see the most promising areas for growth and what we could do to help that?
Look, I think in New Zealand we've made great strides. Since I've been in it for Let's Play Live. The federation piece is really interesting just because it's the only Western democracy that is supported by the government. So it's basically said esports primarily as a sport. That's good. That's a flow-on effect for youth groups, community groups, schools, that kind of magic force field that kind of runs around sport around the country. You don't see that, just to be clear to people, you don't see that in Australia. That's not what happens in the UK, and that's not what happens in America. So we're very forward in that, and we're lucky for that reason. And so what's really great is we start to see that the big area, and we just got to connect the dots, as a specific example, is iwi groups, money that's going into rangatahi, so specifically to Māori and Pacifica, money that wants to grow lower socio, and money, and this is all government money at different levels, wanting to go in to teach kids how to get into STEM industries. Now, of course, that all just conglomerates right into esports, right? Like gaming, esports, and broadcast. So that's great. So we're seeing that, and we just have to keep accelerating that. So we have to give examples and help them with the spend, if that makes sense. There's lots of great groups around the country I could speak to for days that are doing those things at a community level, taking some money, teaching kids what it's like to be a streamer, or what it's like to, code, or what it's like to, all those things. And it's not just about the 1% to be a player. So that's probably the point, is to be a player in esports at the highest level. We can enjoy it, but it's like more statistically harder than being, say, an All Black in this country, right? So let's be clear. Every kid thinks they're going to be an elite player. I'm the best at Fortnite, right? They're not. And so I look at it as a 99% that we want to really capture. And so I just think we've just got to keep going. Education's a big key for all of us that are listening, and know that we're actually in a really good space at the grassroots level, because you can walk into schools now, and I get called daily about this stuff, that if they want an esport team, how do I put one together? There's competitions going on regionally, locally, right from primary, intermediate, all the way to high school. And of course, once that happens, it starts to breed into parents, it breeds into kids, and it becomes normalized. So I'd suggest that we're on the right track, guys, and New Zealand's in a strong position, although we may not see it right now as far as, the big TIs and packing out stadiums. But I would suggest that in the next 5 years, as the 16, 17-year-olds leave and push through into workforces and so on, New Zealand will be really, really strong. The final piece is just getting a bit more support from the government level down, but actually a lot of the bottom of the triangle was really good.
They're trying to do it.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that progress will be in part because of you and others like you, Duane, for doing the mahi on this. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today and taking time on a Saturday. Jordan, you were just about to hop in there before you wrap up.
I was just going to say...
As a lovely optimistic note. So if you want to come in being like, with some real like gross cynicism about everything shit.
I was just going to say on that note, like I think Duane just reminded me, a special shout out that I was... invited to join Digital Natives Academy down in Rotorua for their Get Into Gaming series, which is actually supported by the Ministry of Education and was around all those things Duane said. It was around production, it was around streaming, it was about how you get into esports. And so he's right that, you know, at this very ground level, something's trying to change everything. It's whether or not we'll find the right person in government to actually jump in behind that. And maybe that's a discussion that doesn't need to occur, because you're both right that we're missing out on so much money simply because gaming bad causes violence, doom, IDDQD, who knows.
And it's not just them, but that's the point that both of you are making. I think it is really important to get across that, like, you can seem gross and capitalist when you're just constantly like, it's the money we're missing out on. It's not that. You've just touched on, there's so many knock-on effects, the magic force field you're talking about, the societal flow and community building.
It's just capturing that top level.
There's so many benefits to supporting this space. And just creativity, connection, everything that we want for our kids and our adults. And the money is in some ways the cherry on top.
But they want the damn cherry first.
They want the cherry first. Yeah. Well, boys, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk with you all afternoon, but I will not keep you any longer than I have to. Mr. Duane Mutu, thank you so much for taking the time.
Woo!
Oh, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Love the work, love the podcast. Appreciate you guys letting me come on. So thank you again, man, and be safe out there and enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, you too, mate. Mr. Jordan Tinney, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you for listening once again. We'll be back with you in 2 weeks, and we will see you then.